Welcome to the Townbuilders Podcast. I'm your host, Levi Wintz. Townbuilders is produced by the NTBA, the National Townbuilders Association, implementers of the new urbanism. Find out more at ntba.net. This podcast is sponsored by James Hardie, what the best are made of. James Hardie is America's #1 brand in siding. Their product is elegant and durable and is sure to elevate any building or development. So if you want to find out more, go to jameshardie.com or find them at your local building supplier. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. My name is Levi Wintz, and my guest today is Aaron Lubeck, who many of you may recognize as the former host of this show. Now, briefly, I'm a builder and developer in northern Idaho, creating a traditional neighborhood called Woodbury. And while we were following many of the basic tenets of design, I was in large part introduced to new urbanism and the theory of town building through Aaron's podcast. And in a fortuitous series of events, I actually got to know Aaron. And over the next year, he subsequently convinced me to take up the mantle and continue as host of the podcast. Now, this is all new for me, as it was for Aaron, but I'm humbled and excited at the opportunity to sit down with some amazing people to just grow in wisdom and to highlight some of the amazing work that is being done to design and develop beautiful places that reject the conventional model of development and uninspiring sprawl that is unfortunately so common in America today. Now, as for Aaron, he is one of those amazing people that I'm really excited about to sit down and learn from. And I want to put him on the other side of the equation, let him share about why he's dedicated his life to this line of work. Aaron wears several hats in the world of new urbanism and development. He is a builder, a historical preservationist, restoring over 40 historical homes, a land planner, a policy advocate, and an educator. Aaron is also a prolific writer, publishing a number of books, and he is the acting editor of Southern Urbanism. You can follow his work on Substack at aaronlubeck.com, and he is also an exciting follow on X. Aaron is a mentor to many, a volunteer at heart, and is one of the bigger voices advocating for a better built environment. I hope you enjoy the show, and thank you for listening to Town Builders. Without further ado, Aaron Lubeck, welcome to the Town Builders Show.
It's great to be here, and it's great to be back. I couldn't be more excited that this tradition is continuing on and that you're taking the helm and carrying on the baton and the tradition, because a lot of good came out of this. I know we got a lot of great feedback from people who listened to it. I think our audience was always small, but really the people doing the difficult work, and that was really cool, like the conversations that came out of it. And then as I told you in preparing for this, it was an awesome experience for me to get, I think, 21 conversations for an hour with some extraordinarily talented people. Was just an experience of a lifetime that I'll never forget. And I hope you have a similar experience as you start and carry on the tradition.
Oh, I hope so as well. Well, what got you, back in, was it 2021 that you got started with the podcast? What made you start the Town Builders Podcast and get it going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was on the board of the NTBA. Bob Chapman, who I'd worked with for years here in Durham, North Carolina, where I live and practice, was one of the founders of the NTBA, 25 years ago now, right? And the National Town Builders Association has been transformational for me. I've met so many amazing people there doing so many amazing projects and campaigns, and the roundtables, which for those of the listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's an organization that is the implementing wing of the new urbanism. It's really the developer wing with a kind of a cadre of architects that do roundtables twice a year, 75 to 100 people, to do a 3 or 4 day deep dive in cities like Seaside, Florida, Cincinnati, Oklahoma City. I mean, twice a year we go to cities to kind of study and support each other. It's a trade group in many ways. And so my motivation was kind of weird because new urbanism broadly now splits into sort of, there's a greenfield development world, which is predominantly what town builders are. And then there's an infill wing that does walkable urbanism and these amazing projects that Incremental Development Alliance is certainly more in that world with Eric Kronberg and Ellie Quinlan and so forth. And it's not a critique just on the NTBA, But in the Congress of New Urbanism, it was frustrating that it feels like the answers were here. Like if you read the charter for the New Urbanism, it's like, yep, this is basically right. Like if we're going to fix all of the problems with our cities and that are, cascade into everything from loneliness to homelessness to lack of opportunity to sustainability, the solutions to do those are basically within New Urbanism. I believe that. And at the end of the day, you got to get down to the brass tacks of out of the theory, as we were talking about in the pregame, and into the practice. Somebody's got to put up a 2x4 wall and install the windows and so forth. So anyway, this is my long way of saying there was a frustration, a happy frustration when I served on the board of NTBA. I became sort of a loud vocal voice of saying, guys, people need to know this stuff. People want to know this stuff. And we should grow. We should grow our membership, and we should be expansionary and so forth. And for a variety of reasons, all sincere and not nefarious in any way, there's always been some pushback to that because the NTBA is small. It's effective because the roundtables are intimate at 75 or 100 people. And there was an intention to keep it that way because if it gets too big, it just, you kind of lose the ability to touch or to connect one-on-one with like-minded people. And for weird technical reasons, like once you're over the size of one bus, it's actually hard to do tours, which isn't like a reason not to grow, but it is a real logistic challenge.
Well, and there is something special. I got to go to the round table at Trilith. Mm-hmm. When you get to meet, I think I had meaningful conversations with probably 50% of the people that were there. Yeah. And so that was my heart in wanting to do this podcast too, was there's so much great material at those round tables and so many good conversations that are had, but being able to take those conversations to the masses and expose people to all this wonderful work that the town builders are doing.
It's exactly right. You're getting to my logic on it. And this was also the middle of COVID. So we were all kind of locked up, and somebody made a joke that, everybody started the podcast in COVID because there was nothing else to do. Maybe there's a little truth to. But the podcast hit the best of both worlds. You could be expansionary. You could share the knowledge. You could, anybody who is just, a young kid who wants to build cities but doesn't know where to start could have access to this knowledge without expanding the roundtables. And so it really was serve the best of both worlds. And that was the intent of it. And I think it's been useful in doing that. I'm excited to see it grow further.
Absolutely. Me too. Well, I think that thinking about it, expanding it further, so much of what you do is just advocacy work, advocacy for better architecture, better development practices, better policy surrounding it that's going to encourage that type of development. And anybody within the new urbanism space has that innate understanding that our built environment isn't really serving us the way that it should. It's not really intuitive. It's sort of hostile and not encouraging human flourishing. And so there's that red pill effect that's happening. And if I look at something else that's happening in our culture, the cultural zeitgeist around health and processed foods, there's this whole movement right now that's like realizing all this stuff that we've just taken for granted maybe isn't the best thing for us. And maybe we should think a little bit more deeply about what we're putting into our bodies. Yeah. I kind of feel the same way about, urbanism and our built environment, that it's something that really affects in massive ways, affects our life. It can affect our health, but it affects how we interact with other people, and it affects our just day-to-day lives. But the average American is not thinking about that. And even if they go on vacation in Europe and they're like, oh man, this is just so magical and I love this. And then they go back to their day-to-day life and they wonder why it's not the same. There's reasons for that. And so my question to you is, what needs to happen to expose the average American to the needs of our built environment, and how our built environment is affecting us?
Or even I would call it the values of the new urbanism. I mean, they're in the charter. Yeah. They're not unimpeachable, and it's worthwhile to critique them. I've been amazed that in engaging with really talented college students at UNC Duke and Chapel Hill, pretty much none of them have ever read the charter, which, you can read in 20 minutes. The principles are there and they're not that controversial, but growing to a point where these are dining room table conversations is the goal. And it's interesting. There's a generational conversation to be had, tip of the cap to the generation before me, who are now mostly in their 70s, of the leaders, the original leaders of the new urbanists, who were not that much older than you are now, who in somewhere between 1985 and 1990 said, hell no, we're doing it wrong. This is unacceptable. We're not going to do it this way anymore. And we're going to fix it. And we're not going to play the games. And they were incredibly productive in their unreasonableness. That's probably the wrong word, but they were stubborn, right? And I think there's been a generation, my age and slightly younger, tied in with the YIMBY movement, which was expansionary and growing that base of people who were pissed off about our built environment. And it was less professional and more grassroots. And that has been remarkably effective in its own way. And I'm curious to see what's next. But I do see a sort of filtering of the movement down from a very concentrated seed point. And that's what's necessary. I'll leave it with this too. It's like, you can see a little bit of a pattern. Like the last elections, two election cycles were the first election cycles a president had ever talked about zoning, right? So it's kind of, housing is now in the conversation in normal politics, in normal dining room conversations. And it's not that big a logical leap to take it towards, well, yeah, we need housing, but let's talk about, like Rick Cole was great at this when he was at the CNU. He's like, when he was kind of having these little friendly pissing matches with the YIMBY movement, he's like, the YIMBY movement thinks that new urbanists just want pretty things. And the new urbanists think that the YIMBY movement just wants housing and it doesn't matter what it looks like. And neither are totally true. But Rick Cole was like, why not both? Like housing abundance and inspiration. There's no reason we should settle for less than that. And so I think that's where it's going slowly. And I don't really know what that watershed moment is, but that's the promised land.
Well, in practicing, trying to build beautiful things and also trying to build things that the market can afford, there is friction there. It's not that it can't be done, but I think everybody within the new urbanism movement is dealing with that in some sort of a way. Yeah. Everyone would love to just go build Poundbury, just go over the top and do everything beautiful and perfect. But I think what we're talking about, and especially I think the town builders are in this position of how does this become the new model of development? How can we move away from the D.R. Horton, just suburbia, and how can we actually make new urbanism the standard of development? And I think that's a whole conversation that we can have.
It is. And one you can have with many of your guests, because it is how do we get there? I mean, like the end game is not all that controversial, but how the hell do we get there? It's like this different tax. And I appreciate that, like not that you're saying everybody only wants to produce Poundburys, but like I've always been more impressed when I go on tours, green building tours, architectural tours, whatever, like what people do with limited resources is always more impressive to me and more interesting than what somebody does with an unlimited budget. And you can see this. Levi, have you done the 30A beaches yet? Have you been to Seaside?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So that whole tour, we were down there for the Seaside Prize in January or February, whenever it was. It was amazing. And I've been there before. I mean, Seaside now is easy to sort of paint into a corner because it's $3 million homes, but you can still see the history of it is that they're actually a huge incremental, like they made do to build that thing is the true history of it. To me, that's a lot more fascinating than going to Alice Beach, which is actually an amazing place and fascinating in its own right, but unlimited budgets. Like there was no control or reality of this has to be affordable or real people need to afford this, right? And so I always think the project, I mean, I'm sort of fascinated to hear more about your project, which I think is, checks the boxes. Like this is not the highest end new urban community, but you built a beautiful place, or you're building a beautiful place that people can afford. And I'm sure there are cheaper places in Idaho, but this is not a home for super, super wealthy people. Newtown, St. Charles, and St. Louis, the same thing. It's one of the most impressive places because it's just really well designed.
Yeah. Well, just really quick, backing up one step, because I don't want to get down this rabbit trail, but I'm also aware there may be people listening. We're talking about new urbanism and the founders and this certain type of town building. The founders of new urbanism, can you just make a short history of this? What was it in 1985 that they saw that they said, hell no, we're not doing this anymore? And what is the movement that we're talking about? How our built environment can better serve us?
It's a great question. And I saw your list of the people that you're hoping to interview this year. And I guarantee you there's some better people on that list to answer that question than I am, including some of the founders of new urbanism. I think you should if you have a chance to interview Andres, obviously is great to do. Robert and Daryl Davis, who developed Seaside, I think were this uncommon, stubborn visionaries who had a plot of land in the worthless panhandle of Florida at the time, nowhere near anything. And they were just determined to do it. And we got to spend time with Daryl actually at Seaside Prize. I mean, placemaking for her, she's sort of a retail genius, taking it from literally an empty beach with nothing on it. And she rolled up a coax spoil, or the wooden kind of round, the spoil that they roll out the coax on. She flipped it sideways and started selling vegetables on it in the middle of nowhere, Florida in like 1981 or something. And you can see pictures of this in their book. They just were determined to not build the same normal beach community that was the default setting because of finance and zoning and whatever else. The other founders, some of which are more well-known than others, obviously Andres and Liz are probably the biggest personalities there, who are largely retired now. One of my favorites, who almost nobody ever heard about, was Dan Solomon. I hope he's still alive, actually. He was suffering from Parkinson's when I saw him in Cincinnati for the Congress. One of the nicest men and an absolutely brilliant writer. One of my favorite books, we could pull it up here because I know we got video on this too, but it's Global City Blues by Dan. Is a short book, and it's so brilliant of how he breaks down a couple things. One, he explains the Austrian housing story where people always say, like, well, in Vienna, that all the housing is socially owned and it works great, but he explains that it's more complex than that, and it was a unique moment in time. And he also talks about the three tribunals that every development must face, and it's you have to face the finance. It has to pencil, and if that fails, it fails. You have to face a market tribunal, like people have to want it, right? And oh my God, I'm going to be embarrassed if I can't remember the third tribunal. This is the book. It's a really great book. You can usually get it used, for $6 there. Oh, and then regulatory hurdle. Like if you can't legally build it, then you can't build it. And so every project has to clear these three boards effectively that you go to make through. And he was just a beautiful writer in explaining that. And an architect out of Berkeley.
And that's where I'm at, as a town builders, we're doing this day to day where we need to sell home tomorrow, to keep building and put in the next phase of infrastructure. And so constantly working through each of those hurdles, and you can't go one direction too far. I think that my initial interest in new urbanism and just town building was from the design perspective. I love beautiful design. So I'm speaking from experience when I say I would love to just build the Poundbury. If I had unlimited budget, I got dreams that could go far, but where we're at in northern Idaho, we're building this 80-acre development, Woodbury, and the median income here is $55,000 a year. It's a small community, so we're trying to do a permanent residence. We don't expect this to be a second home community or anything like that. So there's barriers and hurdles that we're running into constantly of trying to make our dreams work within a certain market within these constraints.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, and that's, the real world works like that. Again, I think that most new urban communities are that. I think they do tend to fetch a premium price, partially because they cost more to build and partially because they're more popular. People will pay for access to walk to a coffee shop and have their neighborhood school and have great parks and great design. And while there's some inherent savings from not being able to drive everywhere, most people you pay a premium to live a better life. I mean, it's not rocket science. And there's a whole art form to, as we talked about at the roundtables, of how far do you go on the amenity spectrum? Because some of these new urban communities are unprecedented in
it's wild.
amenity.
And it can cost more. I don't think it necessarily has to, and there's been a lot of good studies that have shown that. But I do think that one of the main reasons why there's a premium to live in communities like this is because there's a lot of demand for it and a lack of supply of product. There's not not many people building this way, and so we see these exponential growth as far as the cost of housing in these developments. And I had someone come up to me and say very bluntly, well, if D.R. Horton continues to sell homes and they can build the same model 30 times in a row and sell out of them, isn't that what the market wants? I mean, the market is responding. And I get what he's saying. Everyone knows we're in a housing shortage. But my response was, where the market has been supplied with a better product, the market responds to it.
It's not like people are having choice too. So where people are looking at DR Bryant, I mean, the one that came to mind is, have you heard of the Trabants? They were the Soviet car.
No.
It was all over Eastern Europe during the Soviet era. And they were terrible cars and famously unreliable, but they were like the one Soviet car. So it's like, if you ask them, like, hey, what car would you prefer? They'd be like, well, a Trabant. You just don't know any different,
Best-selling car in Russia.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's pretty much what suburban tract homes are.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that there's a selection bias? Somebody smarter than me can explain the bias, but if all you're presented is one thing or two things that are crap, then you're going to choose crap. So it is a matter of this movement of growing it further and faster. I think that there's a ton of young people who want to do this work, and it's probably a longer conversation or with somebody else, but like, you count the number of true town builders who have completed projects, and you might get to 10, but you're probably not going to get to 20. Like, this is a very small fraternity, right? And so when I look at that, it's like, okay, well, that one, why is it so hard? Why are so few people doing this, which we could talk about, but also like, what does the world look like with 100 or 1,000? And what would it take to get there?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and my fear is that because we're in such a housing shortage in the United States, if I look into the future, we're gonna be in a housing shortage probably for most, if not all, of my lifetime. That because there's so much demand, and that somebody will buy the tract home that's exact same as the one next to them, that there's no impetus to try harder. If the market is here, why would we try spending more money, taking more risk, spending more time, heart, effort, to do something better? And so I think it's going to take people that simply have the heart of like, no, this is not good, and I want to just give something better.
I think that's true. And we have to unpack it too. I mean, there's been some cultural shifts, because before 1920, we had, booming cities that had to build stuff, and we built great stuff. And it's not like, we have the resource. We have a hell of a lot more resources now than we had in the 20s. So I think some of the financialization of the industry has really forced the mass production and suburbia and so forth. And there was a great quote. I think I've talked to you about it before. Gosh, I'm going to forget her name. Anyway, there's a conference I went to in Wisconsin last year where a young academic had this presentation where her thesis was, the modern world destroys everything that cannot be quantified. And this is sort of answers that question of why are these tract homes that are meaningless and purposeless and placeless selling, and why is it the only thing that's being offered? Is that I think data and the internet and computing and computer processing and the mass financialization and corporatization, eventually everything comes down to binary decisions, and eventually our lending decisions will be done by AI bots, and the whole world becomes sort of less human over time. I think town building is an antidote to that, but it's also very much threatened by it, right? Because we have to deal with the same lenders and the same zoning people and the same planners and all this stuff that's automated. So it is a matter that there is a reactionary movement to that. There's a lot of pissed off Gen Y and Gen Z who don't want to live in the metaverse. They don't want to live in this binary world where AI makes all their decisions for them. And they're craving places, they're craving things that matter, or they're craving meaningful lives in a way that the generations before them sometimes haven't. So I think that that's ripe, fertile ground for town building. And, delivering it's still hard, but there's going to be buyers out there that want to live in places like this.
Townbuilders is brought to you by Brett Jones, PA. Brett is a practicing land use lawyer in Florida, and as a patron and advocate for new urbanism, he leverages his background in corporate law and personal development experience to help landowners and developers get entitlements and cut through red tape to build human-centric, walkable neighborhoods. Visit brettjonespa.com to find out more. Well, and if I might offer another just like anecdote on the American psyche of where we're at, is people have become very, I think, materialistic just in a general sense. And so the standard of living of what is expected is really high. And any tract home you buy from a national builder is going to have the big kitchen in it and a place for your flat screen TV and a massive garage for all your cars to get parked in. And it's very utilitarian, but it's in some sense giving people what they need or what they want, which is a high standard of living, but their quality of life is awful. They don't know their neighbors. And they just live in this very tasteless area. There's not much vibrancy to their life. Whereas I think the Townbuilders are saying you can have that high standard of living, but we want to offer to you too that there's something more than that. There's quality of life. And that's something that the kid that lives in Italy, in Trastevere, and he lives with his grandma and his brothers and sisters, he may have a low standard of living comparatively, but his quality of life is really high.
I think there's some truth to that. And I've kind of learned as I've gotten older, like there's a little bit of like to each their own. Like in your life, like in my lifetime, McMansions aren't going away. In your lifetime, they're not going away. And in some places they'll suffer. I've already seen some of those developments. But and honestly, still even in a lot of these new urban developments, there's no shortage of materialism, right? People still
sure.
And Andres talks about this too. It's not like the people living in new urban developments are choosing, marginally impoverished lives just so they can walk to the bodega or whatever. So there's a combination of this beautiful walkable stuff with the modern amenities and things people expect in a neighborhood, like a pool or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting, though. I do think that there's something to the qualitative side of it, which new urbanism pitches and traditional developments don't, that has value, and not everybody gets it. And I really do think even if new urbanism or urbanism becomes a dining room conversation and it becomes a national political issue and all these things, it's still always going to be partially niche. I mean, we're a suburban country.
Yeah. Probably
are always going to be a suburban country, but you can have 5 or 10% of any city can be great, and the city can be great. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. And the rest is just sort of what it is. So it's not a matter of, I'm amazed at how many people have to convince of this. Like we walk through the crappy areas of Raleigh, Durham and the 15501s and these corridors that are just awful. And it's like, you don't have to fix them. Like, don't just let them be the crappy, like McDonald's, PetSmart, billboard, 6-lane freeway. Like you're not going to fix that. Just focus on the places that matter. And that's, all you can do. And you can make those places great, but you can't fix everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. So you've been working on this for a while and writing. Where do you think the state of the conversation is? How has the conversation changed over the years? And where do you think the conversation needs to go next? Just at a broad scale.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in getting in the hearts and minds and helping people understand what cities are, why urbanism matters, what the challenges are, it's important to have a media source that connects with people on a regular basis. And I always thought like CNU was never thrived at that. I think Rob Studeville at Public Square does a phenomenal job, although it's relatively insular. I've never got the impression that it has a huge readership outside of the Congress. And I think Chuck at Strong Towns has really thrived for 2 reasons. One, he just does good work, like particularly the young folks that he has there creating great YouTube content, creating really good social media that's ever present. And the talks that they give is great. He also thrived because he moved where the void was. Like nobody was doing media in urbanist space. And there was a huge demand for it. And he recognized that and captured it. And that was great. So I do think people are craving this. Again, there's a younger generation that's pissed off they can't afford a home. There's pissed off that they're delaying family formation because they can't find their own footing, just these sort of basic steps that every generation before has done. And so there's a craving for that sort of knowledge, both for future practitioners, for non-professional developers, people who build an accessory dwelling or whatever, and just cheerleaders. There's just, teachers and bartenders who are like, yeah, kind of suburbia sucks. I like my city. I'd like my city to be better. And I'm happy to like help out where I can. So that's why I started Southern Urbanism, which was meant to build upon the other successes in media in the space. But our secret sauce is that we almost exclusively were voiced by practitioners. So where I think there's a lot of planning blogs out there and kind of theoretical urban policy stuff and of varying quality. but I just wanted to capture the voice of the people doing the work. And there's some truth to follow the money and you'll find the answers. Not like in a sinister way that this is like a true crime or something, but like every day you have to make decisions of what kind of tree you put in or how much parking you can provide or how much you can extend the utilities for the next phase. And if you can understand those questions, you're closer to finding the truth of pulling the sword from the stone. So we publish about once a week now. And it's actually a little bit broader than Southern now for a variety of reasons. But we're starting to republish actually Austin Tennell, who I think is on your list. You're going to try to interview this season, which would be amazing. Austin's podcast is amazing. Obviously, his masonry work is world class.
It's phenomenal.
He's writing once a month for us now, kind of sharing audiences and co-branding. Kobe Lefkowitz, who also should be in your list, who is a brilliant writer, and his book, Building Optimism, is extraordinary. And really, it captures a lot of the spirit of new urbanism and town building. He's a young developer in his 30s. His book is phenomenal. And even some of the old guard like Bob Chapman wrote, this is a phenomenal article about, actually, he talked about when Earth Day was created now 55 years ago. If they had a couple more weeks to prepare the platform, they would have included the built environment. And because they didn't include the built environment, it might not be as obvious now that you're working half a century after this, but the American environmentalist movement has always been antagonistic towards city building. Always. You see it with the way Sierra Club reacts to cities and urbanism in California in particular. And so, like, how do you solve for sustainable issues without addressing cities at all? And anyway, it's a sort of fascinating unpacking of the genesis of that problem, which in many ways was the origin of Earth Day. So Bob wrote about his experience with that. Anyway, we're trying to spread those stories, and we think this is helpful to current practitioners who are just trying to do better work, but also recruiting that next generation who want to build better places, the readers of our work.
Well, in my introduction to this whole world of new urbanism and town building came through your podcast, Aaron, this podcast, and so that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here today now acting as the host of the podcast. But there's an air in new urbanism that I don't want to call it a victim mentality, but that, the world is against you. It's all of the zoning codes that we have are horrible and awful. And, the city is going to strike down every single thing that you try to bring up. And there is a lot of red tape that has to be worked through. My answer to that is, I think there's a lot of advocacy that are changing things. Yeah. But I don't want that to be the leading voice. I want the leading voice to be for practitioners. Is that we're trying to maximize land value, and that if you look around, this is actually it's a hard path, but it can be a very profitable path as well. And so I think attacking things kind of from that understanding we're in this capitalistic world, it's like, we got to make new urbanism work for people because they're putting a lot of money on the line to go and build these, especially if they don't have deep pockets. Yeah. And so showing the pathway, that's why I hope this Townbuilders podcast is highlighting the stories of people that are actually doing this and the ways they found to work it out and build really special places.
Yeah, I agree. If I could even taking a walk down memory lane in anticipation of you rebooting this, I think some of the magic we did was trying to figure out those equations of like, why aren't people doing more new urbanism or walkable communities? And how do we solve that financing issue is a huge one that just, if you're not in the trenches, you just don't understand. And Ward's podcast that he did with me, which was, I think, where is it? It was a 108. It was one of my favorite podcasts. At the beginning of it, it's got an obituary for Dan Camp, who did the Cotton District, which was in many ways new urbanism before new urbanism. It's this beautiful kind of Italianate student housing project in Starkville, Mississippi. Like, it's just like in every way, like, what? That can't be a thing. And it's beautiful. We honored him in the intro to it. But Ward is probably the brightest mind I've heard in financing for these things. And he understands the huge challenges of the longevity and patience that's required to do these kinds of projects, because comparable projects in suburbia that might be 100, 200, 500 units churn and burn and sell out in, 2, 3, 4 years. From an institutional capital perspective, Wall Street's interested in that. They can see the end. They can calculate the risk. They don't have to figure out 5 different recessions that might come. But, you see these projects that people are, we could talk about projects that are going to be 50 years. I mean, Grant Humphrey's project at Carlton Landing is probably 50 years, right? His brother Blair, who I hope you get to interview at Wheeler District, that's probably 20, So financing doesn't do that, right? Or Casey Roloff out at Seabrook as well. He's probably got a 50-year project. So how do you find people? And it has to be outside the normal paths because the machine does not support urbanism or town building or walkability. It just supports the same standard sprawl. So it's a huge problem. And I do hope you can certainly find people who are better to talk about it than me, but digging further into that, or Casey would be a great person of how they've managed to do it, because very little information out there about how people finance these things.
Well, I forget who I was listening to, but I know it's kind of this growing voice of just the evils of IRR and how IRR, that one metric, has just changed how we develop and how the whole industry works.
Ward did it. He talks about it in that episode 108, and it's a little bit of like traditional development as a waterfall, and you as the general partner does the work while the limited partner funds most of it and is golfing while you are sweating. But there's no way for you to get paid in this GPLP model, which is completely dominant in American development. There's no way for the general partner to get paid unless you sell the project. Like there's no long-term hold. So it's sort of like structurally flawed for short-term thinking. Because you're not going to own it in 5 years. So why would you put in the nicer HVAC, or why would you put in trees that you're never going to see, or all these things? And there's some messiness to that, but like it really is against the grain to go try to finance a project that's going to finish in 2075. Who do you even go to? Who's actively looking for a project like that to fund?
It's a whole mindset shift.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Harvey Points. Harvey Points are architectural designers that have worked on new urbanist projects nationwide. With a blend of bold ideas and thoughtful design, they have experienced site planning everything from infill projects in pocket neighborhoods to master planned communities. During the site planning process, they develop floor plans that tailor fit to each lot, giving you a comprehensive plan to take forward. They also provide realistic 3D renderings that help the whole team visualize the project from early stages, as well as being a great tool to get city planners and council members on board to approve your new development. We all want to see more unique communities built, and Harvey Points would love to assist you in that pursuit. Visit their website, harveypoints.com, that's Harvey with a B, or follow them on Instagram at Harvey Points. So, with the work you've been doing there in Durham and the Triangle, you've been building, you've been working as a land planner, you've been doing advocacy work.
Yeah.
You've been doing this long enough. Is it working? And what is working? Who's responding to it most in your local area? Is it the public sector? Is it the private sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. Raleigh and Durham have really been two of the beacons of zoning reform in the country, and for a variety of reasons have not really gotten the credit that they deserve. We don't have a really strong media here that promotes things nationally, and then the national spotlight just isn't on us as much as California, obviously, but even places like Texas. And it's interesting because both cities have had pretty substantial zoning reforms in completely different ways. Durham has been revolutionary with small homes on small lots, which I can get to in a second. Raleigh has done some of the best missing middle reforms in the country that has taken a city that's fundamentally suburban, very nice suburban, by the way, with a pretty cool downtown, and allowed for all these missing middle housing types that Dan Paralek and his wife Karen over at Opticos have talked about for years. Now is largely legal in Raleigh. And so the city passed a zoning reform here in Durham called Expanding Housing Choices in 2019 that was transformative because we took the kind of normal southern residential lot type that's usually a 5,000 square foot minimum lot, 50 by 100. Many of them were 50 by 150, and allowed you to do by right 2,000 square foot lots, which is a substantial reduction, 6,000 square foot or 60% from the minimum and like 80% from the norm. And so the market really responded immediately by designing a bunch of houses like this, which is, basic new urbanism, simple box homes with good proportions, big windows, a little bit of front porch and so forth. Great. And in many ways, rebooted the starter home because nobody in a place like Boise or Moscow or Durham, booming cities, was building homes in the 300 or 400,000 range that were new and walkable and in a good neighborhood was unheard of. And so we started doing that here in about 5 years ago. And it was amazing how quickly the market responded to it. Small builders kind of gravitated more towards building relatively affordable homes as opposed to homes for surgeons and so forth at Duke. And that was pretty exciting to see that materialize. So I wrote an article for it here, which is both at published at Southern Urbanism and my blog on housing. Kind of goes through the details of it. But I would say there's sort of two versions of zoning reform. One is procedural, which I think is more targeted at developers like you and your family, that you have a 200-acre parcel and you need to get it entitled so you can build a beautiful, inspiring, walkable place. That process in many parts of the country is somewhere between treacherous and impossible, right? It can take years. It can cost, and here in Durham, it's cost a developer $1 million just to get the permission to build what he wants. Like, there's just not that many people willing to do that. But improving that process needs to be a part of fixing the system. What you see more with the YIMBY movement and these incremental reforms at the city level or the state level is the opposite of that. There's really housing that's below the threshold of special permissions and entitlement. And if you can just gently expand the space where small, undercapitalized citizen builders can build without having to go beg for permission and having to go through this like torturous political process, you can really revolutionize your city. And so the Triangle's had a lot of that, and politicians have really thrived by being pro-housing, have been winning elections in both Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill now. And that's been great to see because we're still kind of the corner of the country. I think Idaho's similar to this, even though it's, not in the South, that is broadly pro-housing, that is broadly pro-business, that is pro-people, pro-citizen, and doesn't shy from the difficult work and isn't stuck like California and the Northeast is, where the system is completely rigged for the current homeowners at the expense of future ones. And it's just stuck. You can't build anything there. So we've been excited to see, people support smaller, more affordable homes. And that's been fun to watch practice. And we design a lot of these. And most of my day work now is doing construction drawings for small builders doing these kinds of projects.
Are you just working with individual builders there in the area, or are you selling your plans online?
So we do a lot of relicensing from Allison Ramsey architects, who you may or may not have met them on one of the NTBA.
I haven't been able to meet Bill yet. No.
So there's two Bills: Bill Harris, Bill Allison, and Cooter Ramsey. I am just a huge fan of their work. I think that there's so many great architects in new urbanism. And what Allison Ramsey's done, though, is they've really captured that more affordable market, and they have a massive library.
It's incredible.
It's 25 to 3,500 plans.
Wow.
And they range from Habitat homes, because Bill's been involved with Habitat literally since Habitat's beginning, to Hilton Head homes. So like whatever you're looking for, they have a price point for. Anyway, we mostly license from their catalogs. There's nobody doing that work in North Carolina. And it's weird. There's like this big vacuum of traditional architecture in the state, even though people want it. There's not a lot of practitioners who service it. So we get calls from those builders who want to build something simple and beautiful. Plans have to be affordable. We're getting those calls, and they're fun projects to work on.
Coming back to the Triangle, what type of parking reform have you seen take place? How has that conversation progressed in the area? Because the Raleigh-Durham area has been growing quite a bit. It's one of the influx places that in the U.S. right now.
Three things, actually. So Raleigh got rid of parking mandates completely about 4 years ago. And it was the 7th or 8th biggest city in the country to do so.
Wow, that's wild.
Durham got rid of them in 2023. And it was on a reform I was proud to work on. That was the first time parking mandates had been eliminated through private citizen petition probably in world history. We were the first to get rid of that. And check this out. This was filed this past week in North Carolina, and I'll see if I can highlight this, but this is to prohibiting certain zoning and development limitations related to motor vehicle parking in North Carolina. The North Carolina cities would no longer be able to be required to specify parking spaces for a development. There's a kill shot at North Carolina legislature this season to ban parking mandates in the entire state of North Carolina. And from what I've heard from the Parking Reform Network, it's one of 5 such bills going in the country right now. So I think, one, that's awesome, full stop. I can tell you, as somebody who designs small site plans for a living, parking requirements have basically made all of them worse than every site plan I've ever drawn for the last 25 years. Doesn't mean that most of them still need parking. I'm not saying that they won't, but they just encumber it of how much you need, how you have to put it on the site. It makes it terrible.
What I'm dealing with this past week, we're going through a resubmission for our plat, but we have a couple streets running through our subdivision that have parking on both sides of the street or on one side of the street. We're trying to do a little micro cottage development within the larger plan. We don't have enough room to get the required 2 parking spots per unit. And so we're asking for a reduction, or we are asking them if we can use just, there's parking on both sides of the street right here. Can we bank those spots? He said in no situation can you use on-street parking as parking your parking minimums, which is just, the fact that that's a non-starter of a conversation is
there.
wild.
I mean, if anybody follows my work, I spend no shortage of time critiquing America's planning institutions because of conversations like that. I've been in hundreds of conversations like that. I've probably been in hundreds for myself, for my own projects, and the same for clients as well. Donald Shoup, who recently died, was sort of the professor out of UNC who was the main guru on parking, who called it in his book, parking mandates are a 100% complete pseudoscience. There's no rationale for them. People come up with numbers and then copy them from city to city. There's no justification for them. Most of the rest of the world doesn't have them. And people still you'd still provide parking. It's not like if there wasn't parking mandates in Moscow, Idaho, that you wouldn't provide parking in this development.
Because somebody might not buy the unit because they're like, well, where am I supposed to park?
You're going to figure it out.
So, but let the buyer choose that.
And frankly, the developer. I mean, because even you might know more than the buyer, but like the idea that a planner or a politician knows better where your parking should go on your project and how many you need is absolutely ludicrous, right? Yeah. So you can come up with that number and you're more motivated to get it right. And we dealt with similar issues like that conversation you just described, which is completely unproductive, and you're hitting a wall with kind of the type of planner who is just like a rule. It's just rule following. The rules are rules. They're not the one to change them, even though they might agree that it's a stupid rule. They just agree that it's your problem and that you need to fix it, even though everybody believes only they can fix it. And you get caught into this tension that's honestly existed for the last 50 years. Parking mandates mostly started in the late 60s and then became literally present in every single jurisdiction in the country. And it's not just that like 2 spaces per house are required. It's just grown since then of like, no, you can't park the car in front of the house. No, you have to have this much width. No, you have to park in back of the house. No, you can't, your driveway mouth has to be this big. And you're like, well, actually that takes out the granite curbs in our historic neighborhoods. And like, it's incongruous with like historic preservation. They're like, those are the rules. You got to take out the nice granite curbs and put in Miami. And it's just like, come on, guys. And so a big motivation for the reforms locally was just like getting out of those dumb conversations. I can critique planners, but we have a lot of really talented people who went into the urban planning profession, and their talents and their time is 100% completely wasted arguing with me for an hour that they say you can't park in front of a house on a flag lot that's 50 feet from the street curb because the rules say you can't park in front. And we're like, it's not even near the street. Like, why does it matter? This is going to make a worse site plan if you enforce it that way. And they're like, that's geometrically what the rules say. And then there's no desire to fix it. Those conversations like have to stop.
Yeah. There's these conversations that are just very on the face, stupid rules that don't make sense to anyone on either side, but they're written in a book somewhere. So they have to be followed. But then as you see spots like Raleigh getting rid of parking mandates and requirements, we still live in this suburban nation. As much as the new urbanists would love everything to be walkable, it's not. That's not how our country has developed. And so part of this conversation, do you see North Carolina or Raleigh in particular backfilling that with investments in public transportation? There was an article I saw last year that Paris was not only getting rid of parking mandates, but they were reducing the number of parking spots in Paris from, I think it was, whatever it was is 50%. It was like they're from 150,000 parking spots to 75,000 parking spots, but they were simultaneously reinvesting into public transportation in the area. And so people still need to get around. They can't necessarily walk everywhere.
It's true. And obviously every development's different, and like how you guys connect to the university is different than how people get along the 30A beaches, like, without a car. So I don't think there's a universal solution for that. Either the reality is most of these new towns that are getting built by town builders are greenfield and relatively detached, not because people want them that way. It's just like, it's not like there's 300 acres readily available in Hollywood. It's just, that's where you have enough scale where you can build a new town that has all the amenities and so forth. So I think of it this way, that how parking affects mass transit and walkability and so forth. Yes, parking mandates unequivocally sprawl a city. It's a waste of land. The land you are required to eat up on your lot to park the cars inherently makes your city less dense and sprawling. Therefore, it makes it less possible to do mass transit, buses, rails, whatever, or even cities that are bikeable for that matter. So this is really an issue of the first thing you do once you find yourself in a hole is stop digging. And by getting rid of parking mandates, we're going to stop digging. It was remarkable in Durham's reform that nobody stood up to defend parking mandates. Even like the worst, most rabid NIMBYs that exist, like didn't even stand up to do it. So I do think my experience with that was that there's really nobody who really believes in these. There's consultants who kind of copy and paste them from city to city. But when it's pushed, I think it's going to fall like a deck of cards. And I believe in the next 5 years, parking mandates will be eliminated across the country and dismissed as a pseudoscience.
Is that from research that has been, you brought up Donald Shoup. I know he's done a ton of writing on this. Do you think it's just educating the public sector? It just needs to get to that point where enough people know the actual data that has been collected, since these requirements got put in place?
It is. I'll show you exactly how that was done in presentations that I did, if I can find this. Again, most people don't care about parking, right? Why would you? You have a car, you need to park. It's sort of frustrating when you go to the university and you can't park and all that. But you don't understand that it encumbers better development, that it keeps coffee shops from happening, and these things that are like, once you learn these, you're like, yeah, that's stupid. Like somebody couldn't open a coffee shop because parking requirements made their coffee shop not work. Let me show you the example I showed when in Durham we were doing this reform. Was this, normal infill commercial building, kind of cute, but like it's right now it's industrial, but you could see this being adapted into like a cool restaurant or coffee shop, right? And so it is, I don't know how to draw on this, but you can see my arrow. It is this building in the top left corner.
For those people just listening, we're looking at a site plan, kind of single level industrial building on a corner lot.
It's about 7,000 square feet, perfect opportunity for adaptive reuse. In Durham, if that was turned into a coffee shop, it requires one parking space per 100 square feet. So now there's a drawing here with 70 parking spaces for this infill building I think it's in a historic district in East Durham, historic district or near it at least. And the space covers, I think, 8 different homes, 8 or 9 historic homes that you'd have to buy and evict and tear down just to meet the requirements of the parking, which isn't needed, isn't wanted. And by the way, also takes away all the charm of the otherwise pretty cool infill building that could be something different. And these are all the houses that you'd have to lose, right? So I remember kind of walking through this in community engagement, and people would come in with like relative skepticism towards any zoning reform. But you show this to them, and it's mostly just like people in the neighborhood, young families and whatever. And you show this to them and they start nodding like, yeah, that's stupid. This is kind of radicalizing. So when people get to understand how bad parking mandates encumber our cities, make them worse, add to environmental runoff, make them less walkable, ruin small business opportunities, there's a reason nobody defends this anymore. And I think when pressed, there's going to be nobody to defend it. And so it's just a matter, legislators are now giving up on cities, that cities aren't going to fix this at scale. So we're going to see state legislatures take it into their own hands and ban cities from their abilities to require off-street parking.
Why are people's initial reactions when they're coming into a situation like that skepticism?
Into just general zoning reform?
Yeah, general zoning reform.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the end of a 50-year run where American NIMBYism is largely based in 1970s Malthusian environmentalism, which has some reasonable, Malthusianism was always a bit weird, but the 70s environmentalism has some legitimate bases for, again, rejecting sprawl, unsustainable growth, corporatism, all these things that frankly are values we share. But it became an issue of sort of stop all growth. And in many ways, in the Californian version, became led by people who were enriching themselves at the expense of people who had less than them. And this hell no attitude towards development has been pervasive for the last 50 years. And it's worse in college towns, and it's worse on the left, like the left coast in New England, where blue states, blue cities are more dominant. And so I think so much of that has been built around just slandering builders and developers broadly, writ large. They're all bad people. They're extractive. They're only in it for money. And you and I know that's not true. And I think most people know that's not true. But there's been a half-century long campaign to establish that non-truth is true. And journalists have been in on it, and the academy's been in on it. And mostly the sort of the NIMBY ethic has been pushing it. So it's not lost on anybody that if you go pitch a zoning reform or a new development in any town USA, that's going to be the baseline you're working from. And that's just a reality most developers know.
So I agree with everything you're saying, but what's at the heart of it? Is it possible that for the past 50 years, no one's seen good development done? Any development that has happened has been a net negative. Yeah. And so is that in some parts, potentially the start of a NIMBY movement where it's like...
Absolutely. And you and I see, although I will say that the best developers are probably the ones who are most pissed off at bad development, even though we're not the ones at public meetings talking about it. It's like we've dedicated our lives to doing it differently and supporting people doing it differently. So I think there's some truth to that. And I know there is a gradient, and I think all of us want better. And then there's sort of like off the deep end NIMBYism, which has elements of mental illness and is just people who are rabidly against everything. That is a whole thing that needs to be unpacked. And they honestly are dominant in college towns that create a lot of problems. But people being reasonable about what they want and don't want in their city is just a political thing that's not all that controversial. And I do think, most development is uninspiring, and America does very bad at this. So there's some reasonable approaches to how do we do it better. And that's really what these conversations are about. I think what somebody once said, 98% of developers make the rest of us look bad. Right.
Well, Aaron, so I want to finish with this section here, read you a quote and then ask you a question based on it. The quote says, "Volunteers don't necessarily have the time. They just have the heart." And I think that anyone that knows you knows how much time you spend advocating for things. I think for the past little over a year that I've known you, every single time I talk to you, you're getting yourself involved in some new nonprofit, charitable thing, advocacy piece. You're writing articles all the time. And you're just sort of this energizer bunny that is, giving life to all these people. You're constantly helping others. You helped me get this podcast started and really pushed me to get this thing started, which I'm appreciative of. But I'm curious, what gives you, the heart that you have for this line of work? Why do you do what you do, and what is that why that keeps you doing it?
I appreciated you sort of leading that question in the prep for this, because I was realizing I don't ask myself that enough. And I think it's something we all need to ask ourselves frequently, because I didn't have an obvious answer for it. But, I think all of us are motivated to build a better place. Some of us had more ability to do it than others. And I've been blessed to have a lot of experience in the trenches doing the difficult work, mostly as a restoration contractor and a designer and builder and so forth. I have that same frustration that Vince Graham has, that, he said, quote unquote, we'd been doing this for 40 years and it hasn't gotten easier, and things are supposed to get easier as they go on. And I know that as I look at younger builders, developers, architects, designers, town builders, it's really frustrating that it's not easier, because we need it to be easier to do better places at scale to fix all the aforementioned problems. And so I still am in the trenches doing that difficult work. But, as I get older, it's more and more about supporting the many, many brilliant young people I'm blessed to work with and engage with to help them on their journeys, who are, going to grad schools, writing, entering politics, doing design work. And that there's a lot of joy in that, I think, as you get older, to try to share your knowledge and frankly, try to prevent, the younger generation from making the same mistakes you did. So you can get to a place that's more skilled and productive than I am at my age when you're there. That's part of just giving back. And I didn't really grow up very wealthy, so I know that access to great places and opportunity is really important to me. And I think, for the most part, people in America figure out whatever they need to figure out for themselves and their family when they're granted that opportunity. And it's really pissed me off to see those opportunities wane and sort of structurally be limited by so many things in land use is radicalizing. And so I'm blessed to work with a lot of organizations like the NTBA and CNU and IncDev on doing what we can do to change that, because it's necessary work. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm only, a couple years into this line of work and just educating myself on it. But I am over time all the more immensely grateful for people like yourself, the people that have been voices in the space, advocating for things, as well as the initial founders of New Urbanism, people like Grant Humphreys that's doing Carlton Landing. New Urbanism has been around for 40 to 50 years now. But as you're talking about earlier on, these projects take 20, 30, 40, 50 years to reach maturity. So we don't have a lot of the data yet. I think there's a lot of theory out there, and some of the real places that exist now that we can see, man, people love these places. I think we could probably measure, if we could measure happiness, I think there'd be a study to be done there. But on the overall bell curve of where we're at, I think we're still at the very beginning. We're just at the innovation, the early adapters stage. Yeah. But I think that the generation that I'm a part of now has stable footing. We have data, we have research, we have all this stuff that's been done that we can hopefully start bring it to the masses. And I think the other thing that's different nowadays is social media. People are more mobile than they've ever been. Remote work is a thing. We have more choice. And so I think as choice opens up, people will choose to move to places. We're experiencing this here in Moscow. Moscow is this nowhere town in Idaho, but it's kind of this hidden gem at the same time, because it's just this amazing community, incredible place to raise a family. It's got everything that you'd want. And through COVID, we saw a lot of people in Seattle that's 4.5 hours away start to say, why am I spending an hour and a half or 2 hours of my day every day in traffic, paying these super high prices, and I could just work remote and I can live in a place like Moscow or whatever. So I think as people have the ability to work remote, they're going to start gravitating towards places that are better built, that serve their lifestyles that they want to live.
Yeah, and I think it plays all into town building, which is a lot of new towns and a lot of rebuilt towns. And places like North Carolina have 300 small towns, and 290 of them are just there and not thriving, but they have great main streets. And I think rebuilding towns is very much an obvious way that town building can go. And I'd leave you with this thought. I mean, I love the idea that you're seeing this sort of generationally, which I think is really helpful and inspiring way to look at it. In many ways, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on. I could see this urbanist bell curve that I don't know where we are in it. I kind of agree with you all that we're kind of at the end of the beginning in some ways. I don't know if the bell curve is the right analogy or not, but we could look at what's happened, and then from there you could have these great conversations with younger folks you're going to interview, like Devin Zugel. I think you're going to have on of like, where does this go generationally? Where can the millennials and Y and Z take this, and what's in the way, and what needs to happen to achieve this future that we all want? Would be a great topic or query for this podcast.
I just finished reading Start With Why by Simon Sinek, which he has that bell curve. And it more relates to buyers, but I think it can relate just the same, where it's like the first 2.5% are innovators, and then it moves to the early adapters. And I think we're right at that kind of switching point of the switching from the innovators to the early adapters. And then after that comes the early majority. And I think that my hope is that through my lifetime, I think this is a much slower developing thing, because housing and neighborhoods are slow developing things.
Yeah.
But through my lifetime, I hope we start reaching this as a majority thing that most people know about and are excited about as well. So
that's the way to look at it.
All right. Last question for you, Aaron Lubeck. We're at the Townbuilders Podcast. This is a podcast hosted by the National Townbuilders Association. So what is a town builder to you?
Yeah, it's a great question as well. Some of this will be sort of the literal definition of it, but I think it is remarkable that there are so few of them. I mean, a town builder is somebody who curates and leads and produces and builds and visions a new place. And place can mean many things, but in this context, generally means, certainly there's housing, ideally a mix of housing. There's beauty, there's inspiration, there's great architecture, and there's mixed uses. Sometimes these neighborhoods just have a coffee shop and nothing else, but many of them have a school and, a bar and office spaces and a grocery store and so forth. But town builders are people who spend generally the majority of their working life building these places. There's only a few people who've ever finished one. There's only probably 3 or 4 people who've ever done more than one. And it is an incredibly small group that has to grow. And every one of those projects and people are worthy of study because of how remarkable their accomplishments were in doing this really difficult work. That's what a town builder is to me.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for being on. You're a real inspiration to me, and I know so many other people, and I'm just grateful for the work you have done and are doing. So thanks for coming on the show. Do you want to tell people where they can find your work and follow along?
Absolutely. So thank you for doing this as well. It means a lot to me to see this continue on. And I'm so excited that you're leading it. And I've seen the list of people you hope to interview. I think are amazing people. That's going to be a great thing for the NTBA and for you personally.
Yeah, this is going to be a learning experience for me as well. I'm looking forward to just learning from everyone that's doing this work.
For sure. If you like this conversation, you can find my publishing work over at southernurbanism.org, where we cover practitioners' voice for building new urban communities. My own writing, which sometimes feeds onto Southern Urbanism, is at aaronlubeck.com, where I publish a blog called On Housing, which delves into politics and land use and zoning reform and training. And along with that, we have a Dartmouth fellow working with us on a new initiative that's about to launch. We could have another conversation about this called the Faith-Based Housing Initiative. But people who are interested in building new towns around existing churches, which is a really interesting, fascinating thing that has incredible demand across the country for. Eli Smith is curating all the stories related to that. He's a brilliant writer and is doing a great job doing that. So you can find the more information on the Faith-Based Housing Initiative at fbhi.substack.com. And thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
The faith-based housing was the main thing that I was sad we weren't able to get to, but that will be another conversation, because there's a lot of cool work that you're doing, and I know other people are doing some work around that as well. So that'd be a fun conversation to have.
I'm always excited to come back whenever you need me, but just excited to see you keep this rolling and can't wait to hear the season.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a good one.